Hey everybody, it's Miss Overton coming at you today with Chapter 5 from the BFG by Roald Dahl. And this chapter is called the BFG. I hope you all are enjoying Pajama Day for our first day of Virtual Spirit Week. I know I sure am. Pajamas all day. So in Chapter 5, we meet the BFG and we learn a little bit about his personality. So here we go. The giant picked up the trembling Sophie with one hand and carried her across the cave and put her on the table. Now he really is going to eat me, Sophie thought. The giant sat down and stared hard at Sophie. He had truly enormous ears. Each one was as big as the wheel of a truck, and he seemed to be able to move them inwards and outwards from his head as he wished. "I is hungry," the giant boomed. He grinned, showing his massive square teeth. The teeth were very white and very square, and they sat in his mouth like huge slices of white bread. "Please don't eat me," Sophie stammered. The giant let out a bellow of laughter. "Just because I is a giant does not mean I is a man-gobbling cannibal," he shouted. "You're about right. Giants is all cannibal and murderful, and they does gobble up human beings. We is in giant country now. Giants is everywhere around. Out there, us has the famous bone-crunching giant. Bone-crunching giants crunch up 2 wopsy, whiffling human beings for supper every night. Noise is ear-bursting. Noise of crunching bones go crackety-crack for miles around." "Ouch," Sophie said. "Bone-crunching giants only gobble up human beings from Turkey," the great giant said. "Every night the bone cruncher is galloping off to Turkey to gobble up Turks." Sophie's sense of patriotism was suddenly so bruised by this remark that she became quite angry. "Why Turks?" she blurted out. "What's wrong with the English?" "Bone-crunching giant says the Turks is tasting oh so much juicier and more scrumdiddlyumptious. Bone cruncher says Turkish human beings have a glamorous flavor," he said. "Turks from Turkey is tasting of Turkey." "I suppose they would," Sophie said. "Of course they would," the giant shouted. "Every human being is diddly indifferent. Some is scrumdiddlyumptious and some is ucky slush." "I imagine that's possible," Sophie said. She was wondering with a bit of tremble about what all this talking about eating people was leading to. Whatever happened, she simply must play along with this particular and peculiar giant and smile at his jokes. But were they jokes? Perhaps the great brute was just working up an appetite by talking about food. "As I am saying," the giant went on, "all human beings is having different flavors. Human beings from Panama is tasting very strong of hats." "Why hats?" Sophie said. "You is not very clever," the giant said, moving his great ears in and out. "I thought all human beings is full of brains, but your head is emptier than a bungadongle." "Do you like vegetables?" Sophie asked, hoping to steer this conversation toward a slightly less dangerous kind of food. "You is trying to change the subject," the giant said sternly. "We is having an interesting babblement about the taste of the human bean. The human bean is not a vegetable." "Oh, but the bean is a vegetable," Sophie said. "Not the human bean," the giant said. "The human bean has 2 legs and a vegetable has no legs at all." Sophie didn't argue anymore. The last thing she wanted to do was make the giant cross. "The human bean," the giant went on, "is coming in dillion of different flavors. For instance, human beings from Wales is tasting very whooshery of fish. There is something very fishy about Wales." "You mean whales?" Sophie said. "Wales is something quite different. Wales is Wales," the giant said. "Don't gobble funk around with words." "I will now give you another example. Human beings from Jersey had the most disgustable woolly tickle on their tongue," the giant said. "Human beings from Jersey taste like cardigans." "You mean jerseys?" Sophie said. "Ah, there you go again, gobble talking again," the giant shouted. "Don't do it. This is a serious and snitching subject. May I continue?" "Please do," Sophie said. "Danes from Denmark is tasting ever so much of dogs. The giant went on. Of course, Sophie said. They taste like Great Danes. Wrong, cried the giant, slapping his thigh. Danes from Denmark is tasting doggy because they are tasting of Labradors. Then, what do the people of Labrador taste of? Sophie said. Danes, the giant cried triumphantly. Great Danes. Are you getting a bit mixed up? Sophie said. I is a very mixed up giant, the giant said, but I does do my best, and I is not nearly as mixed up as the other giants. I know one who gallops all the way to Wellington for his supper. Wellington, Sophie said. Where is Wellington? Your head is full of squashed flies, the giant said. Wellington is in New Zealand. The human beings in Wellington have an especially scrumdiddlyumptious taste, so says the welly-eating giant. What do the people of Wellington taste like? Sophie asked. Boots, the giant said. Of course, Sophie said. I should have known. Sophie decided that this conversation had now gone on long enough. If she was going to be eaten, she'd rather get it over with and done with right away than to be kept hanging around any more. What sort of human beings do you eat? She asked, trembling. Me, shouted the giant, his mighty voice making the glass jar rattle on the shelves. Me, gobbling up human beings? This I never. The others, yes, all the others is gobbling 'em up every night, but not me. I is a nice giant. I is a nice and jumbly giant, and I am the nice and jumbly giant in the giant country. I am the big friendly giant. I is the BFG. What's your name? My name is Sophie, Sophie said, hardly daring to believe the good news she had just heard. All right, that is the end of chapter 5. I hope you all have a great day at home, whether you are hanging out with your family or doing some extra learning. I hope you all are well, and I will see you again tomorrow.